Okay, so the likelihood of a reveal this week just jumped up massively. Nate the Hate doesn't get everything right, but he is very well connected and highly credible, and he is tipping a reveal this Thursday. Some people are saying that this has been backed up by other sources, and well, maybe that is true and maybe it isn't. The fact is, we don't know who these leakers' sources are, and they probably don't know who each other's sources are. So never rule out that it's the same source, which could be wrong. Still, it has to be, I would now forecast likely, that we will get a Switch 2 piece of news by the end of the week, and I have no reason to disbelieve some of the interesting specifics that Nate the Hate has heard, specifically a minimalist tech-focused demo. However, I'm not just going to regurgitate his comments, as his podcast is really excellent and well worth a listen, but I do have a few thoughts to share. As to a precise date, if the reveal is going to be this week, I would find it very odd to think it will be after this Thursday. Remember that the time difference in Japan means that they are frequently a day ahead, and would they reveal on a Japanese Saturday? And the choice of Thursday is incredibly conspicuous because it's exactly when you would expect them not to launch something this major, since they're already launching a big game on that exact date, which all raises the question, why? Let's look at it from Nintendo's point of view. They have scheduled this reveal in for years. Why on earth would you schedule a new game, not a massive game mind you, but still an important one that ties into their major new theme park attraction, which is a huge part of their IP expansion plan? Why would you torpedo that? Longtime commenter Ollie clearly has had the exact same thought as me, which is that there is a chance that this could be not a complete coincidence. Now, let's throw a harness over the horses of hype right here, because I think we are in long odds territory. But is there a chance that they could be leveraging Donkey Kong in a much more dramatic way? First of all, let's consider whether it makes sense, any kind of sense, to have a massive media event on the launch day of a completely unconnected game, as Nintendo appear, according to these rumours, to be doing. I mean, I guess a rising tide of hype raises all boats, and so if Donkey Kong Country Returns HD is the newest game on the shelves, perhaps they think that as people see the Switch logo and turn lovingly to switch their machine on after months of inactivity, they will want people to have a brand new Switch game gazing up at them from out of the eShop. And of course, past approaches are not necessarily a guide to the future, as otherwise they would never experiment and never surprise. They have, after all, seen a game with a similar profile sputter and die last year, specifically Luigi's Mansion 2 HD. Again, a low-key port of a title that had released on a Nintendo system previously in relatively recent years, featuring a marquee character, Luigi rather than Donkey Kong, but still. The game shifted 1.57 million units as of the November update, which is not exceptional. I mean, Miyamoto has always identified 2 million as their target, and while Luigi's Mansion 2 is not by any means a new game, and was clearly not a focus of a huge amount of effort or hype, it was still the major action-style title released during the first nearly half of the fiscal year 24 to 25, and it's in a franchise which has done very well for Nintendo previously. Did they turn around and look at Donkey Kong Country Returns HD and think, well, we don't have too much to lose? Or perhaps they were like Luigi in other ways, spooked, frit, running scared of the leaks that daily seem to puff and wheeze their way across the internet. Again, I really don't think so, but the thought bears consideration. The specifics of this rumour, or that, will be utterly forgotten by the vast majority of their audience base, because most of their audience base aren't scouring the web for tidbits of information. I'm sure they will regard the leaks with irritation, and we have some reports that they have made legal approaches to certain people, being a bit too fast and loose with displaying Switch 2 related content, however on the market would appear to be. Now, having said all this, it's not impossible that they have brought the announcement forward for reasons connected to the leaks. After all, they do have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders, and if it seems that a large amount of information is entering the public realm before Nintendo has had a chance to brief their shareholders, obviously that does not reflect very well on them. Even if these leaks are quite common in manufacturing, it must remain something that concerns Nintendo that they could be perceived, and it's a could be perceived, I suspect, rather than an imminent concern, but could be perceived as withholding information that is critical to the shareholders. Arguably, if they made the decision to pull the trigger on a slightly earlier reveal in late December, last week would have been the first time they would have been able to pull together all their branches free of public holidays. I still maintain that the week of the 28th, 29th or 30th of January would make an awful lot more sense, but I can also see why they might decide to bring their announcement forward. But then again, this week of the year does have some resonance for Nintendo anyway, as it is 8 years since the 13th of January 2017 presentation, which introduced the world to the original Nintendo Switch. It feels like the date that would have been planned. And so that means that when in September they dropped the news of Donkey Kong, they also knew that they would be sitting on his day of glory with the Switch 2, which means that it wouldn't be an accident, which has to at least percolate the molecules in anticipation of something more ape-themed as a consequence. Now, first of all, let's be clear that Nate's sources, puzzling though they are to him, report a very bare-boned reveal, and frankly, if they want to make this the continuity console, there is a logic to this. For one thing, while we have loads of leaks around the console itself, the games are still a complete mystery. That's not entirely surprising, as the console would need a longer lead time than the games, and Nintendo has become very good at keeping its cards close to its chest, but it's still at least a little surprising that we haven't heard even the merest sniff of a new title. Where's the beef? And one explanation for the seeming beeflessness is that Nintendo just doesn't have a plan to show many games just yet. One way they could get around this is by making the prime stake front and center. We basically only have one forthcoming title that seems obviously capable of modeling the upgraded graphics of a future console. And while I think Xenoblade Chronicles X looks really exciting, that game is Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. Whether or not they position it as a launch game, just as Splatoon 3 and Zelda Tears of the Kingdom were utilized for the OLED launch trailer, it would make a lot of sense to model Metroid Prime running on the new hardware if they think it's going to look particularly impressive, which I'm sure it will. Of course, other existing titles could also look really great. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate and Breath of the Wild would be obvious ones to tip the nod to, and I would forecast a low chance we would see at least one of these. But if Nintendo do have something new and consequential, but they don't want it to be something that absolutely warps their entire announcement schedule, then perhaps the title they would go for is not a new Mario. Mario Day, after all, is just weeks away and may be a far better time for a Mario title tied into a whole panoply of merchandise. Instead, what if they went for Donkey Kong? Nintendo has used older console games as a way to tease newer console titles before, but never, I don't think, quite so brazenly. Remember how Metroid Samus Returns and Metroid Prime 4 were announced together, or how Luigi's Mansion for 3DS was revealed a few months before Luigi's Mansion 3 on Switch. Both of these franchises are arguably in a similar position to Donkey Kong. They have iconic marquee characters, but in the years prior experienced niche popularity despite huge potential. Of course, Metroid Prime 4 was cancelled, so Dread turned out to be the game that really changed Metroid's fortunes, while Luigi's Mansion 3 was, by any measure, a storming success. Also remember that the likely developer of the new console is the new Nintendo EPD General Manager, under only Shinya Takahashi himself on the hardware-software development side, Yoshiaki Koizumi, who developed the original Nintendo Switch. Koizumi has a history with the Great Ape as the director of Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, and while that game is ancient history now, it did experiment with its control schemes, using those characteristic bongos. If Nintendo wanted to have a game that once more played around with controls, such as with the kind of resistant analog triggers that have been implied by recent patent fines, it would make sense for Koizumi to co-opt Donkey Kong for the purpose. Donkey Kong could easily be used for a smaller scale game that could double as a tech demo. Think ARMS or Pilot Wings on previous systems. Of course, in theory, any number of characters could be used for this. Star Fox would be a huge reveal in this slot, let alone Mario, but if they want the headlines for this to be strictly about the Switch 2, then Star Fox is too astonishing, Luigi's Mansion too reminiscent of the GameCube, and Mario far too dramatic and consequential. Donkey Kong would be great to see, but not absolutely astonishing to see. And while his game would get people excited, he would not eclipse the launch of the system. In that sense, he would be the perfect Goldilocks game, the top banana. And so, to boot, they would raise the profile of the character long term. They can use Donkey Kong 64 and, who knows, even Diddy Kong Racing to push Nintendo Switch Online around the renewal date of many subscribers who transferred the expansion pack for the Game Boy Advance games in February of 2023. I would forecast a new NSO drop by the end of February, a top 20 selling game from N64 or Game Boy Advance, or even a new game or new feature as likely, given that this is an important renewal date for the company. Of course, all this hype can only help Donkey Kong Country Returns HD. People who might otherwise have slept on the game will now be curious about what this Donkey Kong stuff is all about. And hey, given how much they've pushed Pikmin and Metroid in recent years, it only makes sense that Donkey Kong gets his turn. All things considered though, I think it now a much lower chance than I once did that we will see a new game at all. I still think one is probably more likely than not, but I'm not going to make specific forecasts. For one thing, they want to avoid the accusation of not having a strong first-party lineup. For another, a purely technical demo absent any actual gameplay doesn't seem very surprising or delightful, and let's recall that Nintendo has form of keeping big surprises from even their own staff members. The trailer drop of the sequel to Breath of the Wild at the end of E3 2019 was reportedly a surprise even to many of Nintendo's own staff members. It feels at least possible that there is something that's being held back. On a personal note, if the reveal happens this week, it could not come at a worse time for me, as this promises to be an extremely busy week for me, so while I will try to have content and commentary, I can't guarantee exactly when. I do have another video coming out tomorrow, which was written before all this kicked off, and concerns something that is tangentially relevant to the Switch 2 launch, and responds in fact to a previous commenter. If you are enjoying the content, please do like, share, subscribe, comment, and please check out the Patreon as well. I will look forward to seeing you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.